In this episode, we introduce the no mentation without representation principle and discuss its implications on the notion of high-fidelity virtual reality. Welcome to the Bottom Turtle Podcast. Hey everybody, I'm Dr. Shannon Ray, and we're joined by our co-host Oyani Onimiya. How are you doing, Oyani?
I'm doing okay, Shannon. What up, though? How's your week been?
Man, my week's actually been pretty good. You know, that last week when the last time when we were talking about the whole licensing issue.
Oh, yeah, the licensing situation.
Yeah, I got that resolved, and it is a playground, as I suspected. There's a lot to explore in that area.
Lots of interesting questions.
Oh, yeah, a lot of interesting answers, and so far, I'm excited by what I've been getting, and I was able to confirm a hypothesis that I had. So It's always good when you have a prediction and it, plays out with the mathematics.
I feel you. Oh yeah, that's good. Yeah, I've been busy.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. I know you've been busy all week. I actually really don't know what you've been doing.
It's just been nuts, man. I have like 3 different projects I'm trying to juggle at the same time, and then we got the Bottom Turtle stuff. And we're just starting to figure out the whole marketing part of it. So that's a whole other key I'm trying to make. So there's that. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you, being on it, because I'll ask you for something and then you're like, oh, I'll get that to you. And it's like a few minutes later, even though I know you have this other work.
I was in front of my computer all day. So, in
fact, I mean, that's funny because I feel like typically we're far more jovial, but, I can feel the weight of the work that's been
on me. Oh yeah, like when you, because I just respond like business-like and stuff. Yeah. I was just really busy, man. I can't believe it's just Tuesday.
A couple of days before Thanksgiving. Just chilling. Everything's nice and relaxed.
Yeah. By the way, guys, we're recording this on what day is this? Tuesday.
Tuesday.
So, for the episode.
That seems to be our standard now.
Standard now. Yeah. But I listened to the episode a couple of times, last week's episode. I really liked it. I think we talked about the confusion between the whole hard reality and soft reality, and which one was malleable and all of that. I did give it a lot of thought after.
Well, yeah. So for people who don't know, like after the podcast, we listened back, and there seemed to be some confusion between the malleability of hard reality and soft reality. And, we kind of want to clear that up and, dive into that this episode.
Yeah. I thought about it for a little bit, and I think my confusion kind of came from the use of the word hard and soft, basically. Because, when you say something is hard, it almost implies it's fixed.
What did it imply? Oyani, when it's hard?
I mean,
we may be adults. We may have our own businesses and PhDs, but we still have the sense of humor of children.
Something hard, like something that's not malleable, but hard is is a spectrum, really. It's so. And for me, how I kind of figured it out when I was thinking about it was that, when we say hard reality, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's unchangeable. It's just that the rules are more rigid. It has more strict rules that you have to follow, essentially.
Yep. Yeah. And that was kind of the thing that I think when I was thinking about it and how to resolve it for the audience, it's a matter of the laws of physics, basically. So in hard reality, you are restricted on what you can create by the laws of physics. Yeah. So that's the difference between soft reality, where you can just conceptualize whatever you want in your head. Yeah. Like people can hallucinate. There's not as many restrictions in your mind.
Yeah. And even like even if you go with the example of, say, you are conceptualizing a plate, levitating off the table or something.
Yeah.
All of that conceptualization or whatever is going on in the soft reality is where that's happening. Yeah, but in the hard reality, the laws of physics dictate that you can't just look at a plate and it goes up off of the table and floats in the air. But you could take that idea that you conceptualize into soft reality and then say, how can I simulate this plate going up the table?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
essentially, you can start going crazy and devise some sort of camera that follows your eye movement. And when you
Yep.
open your eyes wide, the plate lifts up because there's an air thing on top that sucks it up. You can go down that path, but remember, it started out from you conceptualizing in that soft reality and then bringing it
Exactly.
into real reality, but still following the rules of physics that
Yep.
exist. Yeah.
Yeah. It's actually funny. I didn't even expect to talk about this episode, but I mean, why not? You get a
Why
segue. You set them up. You got to knock them down. But that's essentially the definition of art that we're using in the context of information,
Yeah.
where art is the act of bringing something from soft reality into hard reality, from the
Reality.
conceptual space to the physical space.
Yep.
And I know that that sounds really broad because that's pretty much everything you do. Like I can conceptualize taking my hand and putting it in front of my face, and I just did it. And you're like, well, that's not art. But you know, I remember there was this one. I think I don't even know if this is true anymore. It happened so long ago. I feel like with today's day and age, with social media and all the information inputs that we get, that things seem so far away. I don't even remember if it ever happened. But do you remember that thing a while back about some dude who took off his glasses and then put them on the floor and just looked at them with his arms folded and like it was like some art piece that got a bunch of attention. It's like, and I remember people criticizing like, is that art? And it's like, well, yeah, given this definition, it is art.
Yeah,
Almost
it is.
everything is art,
Yeah.
but that's the whole point about art. It is that broad.
It is that broad. And, the cliche saying art is life is not just a random saying. It is true.
No.
It is everything that we do. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing is when you are conceptualizing and you're rearranging reality to bring that conceptualization into reality, that is how you program. That is your art. And so whenever you're doing any sort of, reconfiguring of the universe, you're doing, you're doing some art.
Even
basically.
when you create something, like, for example, when I create a logo for someone or something, I'm thinking, how can I, bring something out of the conceptual space into hard reality enough to where it can program someone else and take them from one state into the other state. And so, it's, I think getting the idea of the difference between hard reality and soft reality and the duality between the both of them is actually pretty important for us to kind of understand before we then get into the idea of, no mentation without representation.
Oh yeah, and actually, yeah. So bringing that up before we, last episode I also said something like, from now on when we talk about reality, we're talking about soft reality because that's where we actually live. Actually, I want to take that back. Reality is the duality between soft and hard reality. Yeah, because if you conceptualize something in the conceptual space, that affects how you program the physical space. But then what you program in the physical space and what measurements and what data you're gathering, that affects where your state is in the conceptual space, which then affects how you program. So there's always this push-pull duality happening between the two. Yeah. And so reality has to be the duality between those two. And that's why in the last episode we said we should elevate them. So before people treat hard reality, the physical, as being the end all be all. Mm-hmm. But actually reality is like, it's both of those things together. Treat them equally. Yeah.
And if you neglect one over the other, you're either going to come across as, crazy or just unrealistic, pretty much.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. The good point you make, that when you neglect one over the other, and you treat one as being greater than the other, then you're gonna model reality based off of that thought of placing one above the other. And so you have to ask yourself, what is a better model? Is a better model for you to weight the physical as like 90% of it and the other one as 10, or the physical as 100 and the other one as 0? Or is it a 50-50 dual split between the two that actually gives you the best fidelity of modeling what reality actually is as a being of mind?
Yeah, I definitely agree. So, I mean, in conclusion, hard reality is more restrictive. It's restricted by the laws of physics that, we know and have used to create all of this stuff around us, bridges, airplanes, all that stuff. But, that came from the space of conceptualization that is, soft reality. And it is equally as important as hard reality, essentially.
Yeah. And so given that, though, we want to anchor soft reality to hard reality. And that's when we introduce the principle of no mentation without representation.
Yep.
Yeah, where the word mentation has to do with mental activity, and representation has to do with the physical state that coincides with that mental activity.
Yep.
And so, if you remember from the first episode, all the way back, like 4 weeks ago, a month ago, we ended with an example of the idea of telling someone a secret. Like, so say you go up to someone and you tell them a secret.
Yep.
There's a state of that person before you tell them the secret, and a state of them after you tell them the secret.
Yep.
After you tell them the secret, they can get up, walk into another room, and then like tell someone that secret or hand that secret to somebody else.
Over to someone.
Yeah, and hand it over to somebody. So they've actually stood up and physically carried that information. That's no different than if I wrote it on a piece of paper. So what that means is that whenever you're communicating with someone and they're comprehending what you're saying, you're actually changing their physical state. So you are actually programming physical reality when you go from one mental state to another mental state in soft reality.
I like the example that you had used when you said that imagine someone, imagine if you, back in the day when we played, was that PlayStation 1? I think that was what had it. And we were, I think it was, but by 2, they didn't, no, they still had the memory cards.
PlayStation 2, they still had the memory cards. And even by Xbox, when the Xbox 360 came out, they had that hard drive that you could just
plug in. I had that. I think I still have that on my Xbox now. And essentially, you could save a game and go over to your friend's house and just continue right there. It's as
with a completely different system and a completely different game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what we're saying is about as physical as that. Someone tells you a secret, you can walk into another room and physically hand them that secret.
Yeah, and what that means is that when someone's communicating to you or talking to you, they're changing your physical state. Like they're changing the literal configuration of the universe by communicating to you. Like we're changing your configuration right now just by listening to us. Yeah. And that's not trivial, because like if someone were to tell you tomorrow that your mom died, God forbid for anyone if that's the case, I feel, but if someone tells you that, you're going to go from a state of oblivious, happiness or whatever state you're in
sadness.
To just being sadness, and now you've completely changed, your location in the conceptual space. And to try to communicate what it means to change your position in the conceptual space, we want to tie that to statistics and how you program reality and how you're programmed by reality. So you remember, like I sent you the outline of the episode, and we're going to use the example of the person who's never heard of stealing.
Oh yeah, that made me actually think of that movie about I think it was a Ricky Gervais movie.
Ricky Gervais, the Invention of Lying, or something
Invention of Lying, yeah. So imagine you're living in a world where this person knows what it means to own something.
Yep.
Knows what it means for someone else to own something. Understands that concept, but the person can't even conceptualize the idea of taking something that doesn't belong to them.
Yeah. So imagine that person who can't imagine taking something that doesn't belong to them and then saying that it's theirs. The likelihood that they're going to steal something is pretty much zero.
Very
low. What I mean? Yep. Unless they do it by mistake. But if that person suddenly learns about what it means to steal, then their probability of them,
making a choice
stealing
to steal
something goes up significantly. Yeah. And that state where it's the same person, but they never heard of stealing, and now it's the same person, but they've heard of stealing, those are two different physical states. Yep. And that person could be standing in one location as they go from that physical state to another physical state. So their location in the physical space hasn't changed, but their location in the space of statistics, in the conceptual space, it has changed. They've moved from one state to another. And the way that we quantify this physically is there is now, how do you model their likely behavior? What is the likelihood of them programming the reality one way versus another way?
Versus the other way. What's the likelihood of them deciding to make the choice to take something that doesn't belong to them knowingly? Because of course we still have to account for, maybe they thought it was their phone or something.
Yeah.
But, we're talking about stealing with intent, with the intention to steal. This person has never thought of that before. The idea filters into their head. Now they have the idea, they've conceptualized what it means to steal something.
Yeah. And this is it's like, this sounds kind of like it's this may sound trivial, But when you attach this idea to the idea of high fidelity virtual reality, now you start getting into some implications about experience and what is the meaning of experience. And I was actually talking to one of my friends. He's a computer engineer and a electrical engineer. And we were talking about this. And, if you have a high fidelity virtual reality, I mean, I can put some machine on my head and
like the Matrix,
information update. Yeah, like the Matrix. And the information updates I get are indistinguishable if I were walking around in my house. Then with that virtual reality, maybe I get the experience of what it's like to be stabbed, or maybe I get the experience of what it's like to live an entire other life. And when I take off the headset, that experience still remains. And that new experience may change how I move and program in my physical space now, having had that virtual experience. Yeah. And so those virtual experiences, they're changing your location into conceptual space, while your physical body was maintained in one spot and didn't change. So your physical state changed, but your location wasn't changing.
It wasn't changed. I think the thing, and this kind of, I guess, ties back to last week's episode where we were making the argument for does it really matter if we're in a simulation or not? If you actually consider the Matrix, I know we talk about the Matrix a lot, but
we're going to keep talking about the Matrix. Y'all got to get used to that. It's going to keep happening every time.
I think the brilliance of that movie, was that you can clearly see what that duality that we're talking about means.
Yeah.
You can clearly see, the soft reality and the hard reality and how they interact with each other. Now, because now in the Matrix, they've gotten to the point of high fidelity virtual reality.
Yeah. To the point that where if you die in the Matrix, you die in the real world. Yeah.
So it matters.
And the real world, put that in quotes.
Yeah, in the real world, in quotes. Exactly. Yeah. And which, for all we know, could be exactly what this is.
Yeah. But the point is in the thing about the Matrix that's pretty profound is because your death in the Matrix world coincides with death in the real world. Both of those worlds are real. They both give real experience. There's no difference between the two
at all.
And actually, it's like there are two coupled universes that are coupled to each other, where something that happens in one affects the state of the other. Because if Neo dies in the Matrix, he's not in the physical space,
he's not in physical space anymore.
Yeah, these are essentially two entangled universes. But the difference is that somebody who created the simulation, the machines in the Matrix, they have the capacity to change the laws of physics in one universe. And so that was kind of like the whole point with soft reality and hard reality. If you are in the simulation and you don't have access to the inner working of the simulation, you can only rearrange the configuration based off the rules that are
in place. Yep.
Yeah. But if you're outside and you control the simulation, then now the simulation is essentially just the hard reality of the person programming it. And so they're restricted by their laws of physics. But
and on and on and on.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
I think it's pretty interesting, but overall experience pretty much it just depends on your changing configuration.
Yeah.
And I think that is something that is very profound if you really think about what that means for the principle of no mentation without representation is that, your experiences or things that you think about, your conceptualization and all that, it definitely affects the physical space.
Yeah.
At the same time. Yeah.
Yep.
And it has the power to, reconfigure you physically.
Yeah. Yeah. I forget. What was the, what is the thing? I forget. Yeah. Well, the thing about the high fidelity virtual reality too is, it makes it seem as though, it shows the capacity to which we can bring what we conceptualize into reality.
Yeah.
So if I or you were to create our own high fidelity virtual reality, and we can hook up our friends to it, so we can program whatever experience that they want to have. So we can make them, fight dragons. We can make them ride a unicorn. We can make them do anything. Anything we conceptualize now in the conceptual space now gets brought into the physical space. And remember, that was brought into reality by reconfiguring the physical configuration on the simulation or on the computer that we've created. So essentially at that point, we can literally bring anything we want into reality because these experiences are indistinguishable.
Yep.
So we've gotten to the point where, and it's funny because as a culture, as a group, as a human race, we've gotten to this point where we essentially can create whatever universe we want. Give it a few more years if we don't destroy ourselves and don't
we
go
will
completely
actually
insane
start
with
to
information.
really get the high fidelity stuff in a few years. Yeah.
But I mean, I know it's a cliched word to use, but at that point, like, are we really indistinguishable from gods at that point?
I mean, what is a god anyway? A god essentially is a function of how much control over the system you have.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of ways to conceptualize God, like if you're talking about it in the physical space or the conceptual space. But in this sense, I'm talking about this idea of an all-powerful, all-knowing creator, like that can create anything into reality. That is the aspect of God I'm talking about, because when we get to the point where we can create basically universes whose experiences are indistinguishable from this world, then, if you get trapped in those universes, just like we said in the last episode, if you get stabbed, it's still gonna hurt.
It's still
There's
gonna hurt.
consequences. Yeah. And if it's like the Matrix and you get stabbed and you die,
yep, that's it.
What's the difference?
So what's the difference? Yeah, and that was I think one of the biggest takeaways for me when I was thinking about this episode we're gonna record, is the idea that if we do have this high fidelity virtual reality, if the laws are set up in such a way that if you get stabbed in one, you get stabbed in the other, or if you die in one, you die in the other, it really does bring home that idea that, what really is the difference. So if indeed we are in a high fidelity ancestor program type reality, what is the difference?
Yeah. Well, it's funny because the idea of getting stabbed in one, like, the correlations between the two worlds don't have to be one-to-one, like stabbed in one, stabbed in the other. It could be like anti-correlated. You get stabbed in one and you get, I don't know what's
it depends on the rules.
It depends on
the rules or whoever simulated that reality, I guess. Yeah.
I only brought that up because this whole setup is reminding me a lot of quantum entanglement, and you can have things that are anti-correlated quantum entanglement.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I think overall the idea we're trying to get across is, if you are able to conceptualize an experience, for example, in the conceptual space, and you have a means to create some high fidelity virtual reality type of, program out of it, to where people who get insight into this simulation can actually physically almost feel whatever's going on. Kind of like, what's that Black Mirror episode?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, that's the thing. I knew there was something. Yeah.
Kind of like the Black Mirror episode. Like it's so clearly obvious that was what that whoever wrote that episode was trying to get across. Yeah, it's clearly obvious that's what it was trying to do.
We just have to say unequivocally that Black Mirror is brilliant.
Yeah.
At least the last season was kind of whack, but the first episode of the last season was good. And that was the episode where those two dudes that were playing the game were banging each other in the video game.
The game.
Yeah, but that game, like that episode, should really make you think, because clearly they're only banging each other in the game, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, are they cheating? Is this really like an infidelity of some sort?
I mean, I had a whole bunch of interesting conversations about the ethics of that with a couple of people, and it seemed to be the general consensus was that, it is cheating.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, especially given the way that we treat reality as being a duality between hard and soft reality, that you are absolutely cheating.
Yeah, so
because the way that I put it into perspective is, take, like, if I had my best friend, for example, and we were in this game, and I knew on the other side it was my best friend, like Jacob, since I was 7 years old. I am not trying to like bang him in a video game. That is enough to know.
But I mean, you say that
enough,
now.
That's enough to know. That's enough to know to put up that border that that this is a real action you're taking.
Yeah, but man, and what's so interesting about that is that by default we know the answer to that question.
Yeah, we know the answer to that question.
We know the answer to that question. Like we know, that ain't right, bro.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just the I think the clarity of reality between the conceptual and the physical space and how these things are related in terms of their malleability and through experience, I think it gives a perspective on these type of things that make it easier to navigate ethically and, what's occurring. But there was something I wanted to bring up, and that was the idea of a space. And so when we say something like you're changing your location in the conceptual space, I wanted to tie that to your change in statistics. So in the first episode, I mentioned that some of the research that I do has to do with quantum fidelity. And that's essentially a question of the similarity between different quantum states. And so any question of fidelity is always a question of measurement statistics. So you can imagine that, like, take the coin flip, the best, simplest statistical example, and imagine that you have this coin and you can change its weightings from, 100% heads to 0% tails, and or to 100% tails, 0% heads, and everything in between. So say someone hands you a coin and you don't know what its weightings are. You don't know if you flip this thing, if it'll give you tails every time. You don't know if you flip it, it'll be 50-50 heads and tails. And so you give the coin and you start flipping it to determine what type of coin it is. When you make your first flip, it'll land heads or tails. But there's a lot of uncertainty. Like, you can't tell whether or not what type of distribution is associated with that coin just from one flip. So you flip it again, and so you get heads 2 times in a row. And the more you flip it, the more you can start to determine what type of coin you have.
Yep.
Yeah. And so the statistical distance has to do with how far 2 distributions of that coin are from each other. So to understand that, we can imagine, say there's a person in a room, and they can't see outside of the room, and there's this little slot that opens up, and periodically a coin comes sliding through the slot. And this person knows that whatever's producing this coin is this machine. And someone in another room can change the settings of this machine. If say they can change the settings between 0 and 1. If the setting is set to 0, then you get 100% heads, 0% tails. And if it's set to 1, then you get 0% heads, 100% tails. And then all the settings in between are everything in between. So if I set it to 0.8, then it's 20% heads, 80% tails, for example. Tails. Okay, and so assume that there's someone who has this dial. They press the button, it sends you a coin, and now you're left with a coin. You have to figure out what type of coin it is. Whenever you have, like, say it's an 80-20 coin, 80% heads, 20% tails. If I flip that coin over and over again, and I do many trials, like, the number of heads and the number of tails, it'll converge to the distribution of the coin. And so this is what we call a typical sequence. A typical sequence is, like, I did 1,000 trials, and then I compared the percentages, and after 1,000 trials, I got 80% heads and 20% tails. And so that would be a typical sequence for that coin. And so imagine that with, every single time you flip the coin and you get a new data point during your trials, your uncertainty about what type of coin it
is reducing.
It reduces, it decreases, exactly. Yes. But there's a certain point where you have to determine whether or not the coins are statistically distinguishable. So go back to the machine and imagine someone sets the machine to 0.8 for one setting, and then they set another one to 0.800001. And so now you have a coin that's 0.8, another one that's 0.80001. And no matter how many trials you do, that uncertainty interval that exists, there's no way to actually determine whether or not you have the 0.8 coin or the point. Yeah, you can't tell the difference. And so the uncertainty on the outcome, given your access to these trials, that uncertainty interval is your margin of error. The margin of error between 0.8 and 0.8001, they overlap. And so these two coins are not statistically distinguishable. Yes. And so now we have a clear notion of distinguishability between coins, like whether or not it's possible that the margin of error, if the margin of error of two settings don't overlap, then they're distinguishable. So, for example, the margin of error between zero point 0.8, having it set to 0.8 versus having it set to 0.2 on that machine, those things are so far away from each other that their margins of error would have to be huge for them to overlap. And so because they're so far away and their margins of errors are small enough, they're statistically distinguishable. And so to measure the distance between two different settings of that machine, what you do is you count the number of distinguishable settings there are between two given settings. And then assuming that you have infinite trials, you count all of the distinguishable settings, and that number of distinguishable settings is the distance. And that's how you determine distance. And this is like the first example in Wooter's paper. Yeah. Yeah, how you determine statistical distance. And in this case, the surface is a one-dimensional surface because you only have this one parameter between 0 and 1. If I have two parameters, then you have a two-dimensional surface and so on and so forth. But this example is not an example for quantum statistics. This is classical statistics. This is one way that we determine the distance between different statistics. And so when we're talking about your change in configuration in the conceptual space, if we treat everything you do in terms of your likelihood of how you program reality and how you're programmed by reality, so are you likely to steal or are you not likely to steal? Your behavior, the statistics of your behavior, then we can actually see that you're actually navigating this space. And this space depends on your configuration, no mentation without representation. So you get a clear idea that you are actually navigating two spaces at once. You have the physical space that you're standing in, like you're in your room, you can get up, you can walk to the bathroom. Just as you can do that in the physical space, there's also a conceptual space, the space of your configuration that you're also navigating. You're navigating these two spaces, and this becomes clear when you treat the conceptual space and the physical space reality as a duality between those two. And this is what, and the thing that allows you to bridge these two different spaces is information. That's what no mentation without representation does. It bridges these two spaces. So whenever I'm talking about where your location in the conceptual space is, I'm actually talking about your physical configuration, which can be determined through observations and measurement statistics.
Yeah. And I think it kind of goes back to the earlier analogy that we had used about the guy who had never heard about the concept of taking something that wasn't his.
Yep.
The moment that concept comes into his head, the moment he's able to conceptualize that idea of, I could just take stuff that's not mine, he has moved into a completely different space.
Yeah. Could be almost an orthogonal space, actually. Like it's a pretty significant change in location. Yep. So this is what we're trying to do here at the Bottom Turtle Podcast is, like we said, we're trying to construct a language for conceptualizing reality where information is the basis of it. Because at the end of the day, information is just a question of the physical state of the universe. What is the configuration of the universe? And based off the past and present configuration, what will be the future configuration of the universe? Yeah. Because as beings of mind, our experience depends on our physical states. And so there is a physical state of being happy, there's a physical state of being sad, and you have to take actions that keeps you in one configuration versus another configuration, in one place in the conceptual space versus another place in the conceptual space. And once you get into that location, you then start to rearrange your surroundings and reprogram reality so that you can make that configuration stable.
Yeah, especially because you now know from experience, and it doesn't even have to be a personal experience. It might be something, you heard somewhere that you were able to connect to, but you now know that, I don't want to be in this neighborhood of sadness. So I'm going to, do everything I can and reconfigure my physical space or reconfigure the conceptual space to ensure that I do not end up in this neighborhood of sadness. It's like you're walking around your neighborhood and you know that this is a neighborhood where, I'll probably get robbed here. So I don't want to go into that neighborhood. It's the exact same thing.
You don't want to go over there.
Yeah,
and
this, same thing.
And that's what we're trying to say is like, you're navigating this space, but I don't know how aware people are of that because this space is tied to the physical space. It has rules. There are laws in this space. You know, in that last episode where we said we all see the cliff, we don't walk off the cliff. There are people just walking off cliffs blindly left and right in the conceptual space.
In the conceptual space, yeah. And I think a lot of it is simply because a lot of people are not making that connection to where these two spaces are. There's a duality between them, and you have to treat them equally.
Yeah, you have to treat them equally.
Even and for me, when you build websites, for example, there's something called wayfinding. And
yeah, you told me about this.
Yeah, wayfinding is essentially how when you build a website, you intuitively want to build it in such a way that the user is never lost. How many well-designed websites like Yahoo or CNN or any website you frequently visit that's well done, do you wonder where you are on the website?
No, usually you know exactly, and if you come across a website that's poorly designed, you will be like, what the hell is this?
Yes.
Yeah,
okay, I'm looking, you already know, okay, once you log onto a website, if you're trying to log in, for example, just thinking about the idea of logging in.
Yep.
You log onto a website, you know exactly where to look.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought this up because this actually helps hopefully will help people conceptualize what it means to be in one location on in the internet versus another location on the internet. Like you type in something on your computer and it goes into a configuration that, it brings up a menu or it takes you to a website and it's speaking to another computer somewhere else. So the state of the computer somewhere else, its changed, its configuration has changed. And then the state of your computer, it's changed. And so your physical computer is actually moving around in the space of configurations.
It is important and that's kind of what you said, like people walking off cliffs in the conceptual space or just being stuck in bad neighborhoods, quote unquote, in the conceptual space. And a lot of it is just the lack of awareness that it's an actual space that I need to learn the rules to navigate.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the thing is, my background is also in general relativity, where all the mathematics of general relativity, like the base mathematics, is differential geometry. And so when I'm talking about this space, in my research, we actually construct these manifolds. Like we actually constructed geometries and we're actually looking at how trajectories on this geometry where where every point on the geometry is represented by a different statistic. And so for me, when I'm conceptualizing the space of configurations or the space of statistics or something like that, it's an actual geometric space.
Yeah.
Like in some of the research that I'm doing right now, I'm actually I showed you that geometry the other day.
Oh,
remember?
yeah. It was finding the amount of... Don't say what. You know what? We're not talking about it. This is some top secret stuff. Okay.
No, don't say that. It's not top secret. It's just a matter of
It's still ongoing.
It's still ongoing. I want to publish it. I ain't trying to get scooped. I'm not trying to tell people my game plan,
Yeah, but it's brilliant, man, guys. You have to see some of the stuff he works on, man. It's great.
Well, hopefully just with these results coming in as they are, hopefully we can write them up and submit them for publication soon. And once they're published, then I'll talk about them freely.
Yeah, it's so interesting because just the level of awareness that it takes for you to, fully understand that this conceptual space is about as important as the physical space is the first step to trying to figure out how you can effectively navigate it. And it might sound like some philosophical type, whatever, but this is for real. Like this.
No mentation representation makes it physics. It's physics.
It is just basic physics. And because I can't just imagine if you woke up at 6 a.m. to get ready for work and, you hopped in your car and you just end up somewhere. You don't know how you got there. You don't know where you're going from there.
Yeah. You don't know if it's safe.
That is about as real as it is to just be lost in a conceptual space. Yeah. That is not a feeling that you will be comfortable with in the physical space. You should not be comfortable with that in the conceptual space. Absolutely not.
Yeah. Oh, and I completely agree, man. I mean, we're preaching to the choir at this point. But the one other thing I like about the Black Mirror episode. Do you remember the episode where there was this guy who gave up the rights to his I guess it was his mind. He gave up the rights to the configuration of his mind and he was in prison, and so he was sentenced to death. and some dude took his data and created this virtual version of himself that people could come into this museum and they press a button and he would die. And so he would keep dying over and over and over again. You could actually like get a little handheld version of him to where he's always screaming and being tortured. And when you think about the episode and you're trying to think about like the ethical implications of the episode and what's actually going on here, are they doing something wrong? Well, when you understand that experience and that experience has to do with configuration of the universe, that show essentially took the universe, put it in a configuration of pain, and it's just torturing the universe.
One person, yeah.
Because at the end of the day, we are derived from the universe. There was a point where we didn't exist, and eventually the universe evolved until we were in the configuration of us as minds existing. And so whenever you're feeling pain or suffering or whatever it is essentially the universe, as you being a subset or a subspace of the universe, it's essentially the universe experiencing pain. So for me, in that episode where they create that thing and start torturing it, it's like, no, you don't take actions to create suffering. It's the universe experiencing suffering no matter what. And I'm not, ethically, I'm not going to be creating, for example, AI that are essentially not artificial consciousness, but just consciousness, like we were talking about the last episode, and just start torturing it. That is unethical and wrong because
what they were doing in there.
yeah. Because we know, like, if you and I are in fact some consciousness has been programmed by some higher civilization, and they just changed the settings so that we're suffering the entire time. That would be no different than if I just went and I stabbed a child or something like that and I just watched it suffer. Yep. No, you don't let the universe suffer.
Yeah. Man, I gotta go back and watch all of those Black Mirrors.
Oh yeah,
again,
it's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Yeah, I love it. Well, I think that we wanted to keep it short this time.
Yeah,
I feel like we covered everything we wanted to.
Yeah, we're trying to keep it short, but hey, overall, just remember, guys, the conceptual space is about as important as the physical space. It has its own rules, its own laws that you are better served by paying attention to it, learning these rules and figuring out how to navigate it effectively. Some of this stuff we'll probably talk about as the podcast goes on.
We're definitely talking about it.
Yeah, how to effectively figure out, where in the conceptual space that you are and, how to navigate it and things like that. But really start to connect to the idea that it's as real as you walking down the street, going from one neighborhood to the other. That is exactly what it is. It has its own set of rules.
Yeah, and to point out, like Oyani was saying, like, how do you know what your location is in this space? There's one answer to that, and I think anyone may be able to guess it. It's your feelings.
Your feelings, yeah. Absolutely.
Your feelings. Feelings are associated with no mentation without representation. Every feeling has to be associated with a different physical configuration, a different physical state. And your feelings are telling you where your location is.
Just pay attention to it, listen to it, be honest about it. Trust me, you will navigate that space more effectively.
Yeah. Because if you lie about what you're feeling, then how do you know what neighborhood you're in? And how do you know how to navigate your way out of it?
That's how you get lost.
That's how you get lost. Yeah.
That is how you get lost.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So
let's go ahead.
We hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Thanks for always supporting us, listening, subscribing.
Definitely.
Giving us those likes and thumbs up on social media. You can always ask us questions, or if you disagree, we want that information. We want to know. We want new information, guys. Hit us up on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. We are at the Bottom Total Podcast, and this episode will be coming out on Monday. Every other Monday.
Every other Monday
on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and all the other guys. Stay turtling, guys. We'll catch you guys next week.
Stay turtling, everyone. Peace.